Good morning. I'm Rod Hutchings from Melbourne, Australia at a nice 1 a.m. in the morning. So today, in today's dynamic work environment, managing change is crucial for organisations. Navigating change management strategically and tactically stands at the heart of modern HR practices and addresses the needs for organisations to adapt swiftly to technology shifts, changing workforce dynamics, evolving employee expectations. So this topic today is really an exciting topic and underscored by the challenge and opportunities presented. HR plays a critical role, and it's really important that we have clear comms and stakeholder engagement, and a focus on the human element of change is so critical. So just welcome today's panel, and let's bring forward the panelists.
Hey, Rod, everyone.
Hey, what a great full list of panelists we have here today. So just as we start, I'll ask, we'll just go around our virtual room and introduce yourself and what interests you in change management. So if we go to Mark first, and we'll go from top and around.
Thank you, Rod. My name is Mark Vollmer. I'm the Chief Team Officer at Bortnick Tractor Sales and Equipment Dealership in Northeast Ohio, Northwest PA. We're kind of rewriting the standard of HR. We are started as a smaller company when I joined, and now we're growing. We're expanding operations, expanding staff, and change is constant with our world, that what we're dealing with. I've seen change from a couple different angles. I was in 20 years as an educator, from preschool to high school, an administrator. So that world is completely different from this world. So that change, compounded with every other change I've dealt with, makes me passionate about the topic. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mark. And going to, is it Sanjeev?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm right now in the middle of like a personal transition myself. After almost about 32 years of working in the corporate world, I have just moved back to India from about spending 12 years in the States. And I'm actually like a new founder for my own consulting organization. So I'm literally going through like a very massive change myself. But throughout my experience, especially in HR, I have really always believed that HR teams, if you really think about like finance, like a CFO is driving finance, IT is driving technology. And I've always believed that HR needs to be the expert on change management, because we're dealing with people. And the most difficult thing to change is people. So to me, like it's a topic that I'm really passionate about, just because all the kind of different changes that I have been really part of. I worked in the private sector, I worked in international development, and I worked in the humanitarian sector. I've been in sales, marketing, process excellence, and in HR for the last 20 years now. So almost like every role, you have to literally go through like a personal change, but then there is an expectation that you're also going to bring in change and drive the agenda that you're driving for the organization. So it's a topic dear to my heart, and I'm hoping that I'm going to learn from my panelists and also share some of my experiences. Really happy to be here.
Thank you, and welcome. And welcome, Chris.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. So Chris Smeltzer, I am a founder of an organization called the Change Mindset Community, where we are really focused on helping organizations build the capability to change, right? And we do that by helping individuals and leaders kind of understand how to thrive through times of change. So my background is I'm about a 12-year management consultant, had helped a lot of organizations manage large-scale, complex global change. And what's really occurred to me is, in a lot of these change programs, we never step back and say, how do you as an individual navigate change? How do you develop that capability to actually navigate change? You've been told your whole life change is constant, and you're just expected to figure out. But there's some cutting edge research in neuroscience and positive psychology and human flourishing where we can actually teach people to kind of offset some of the triggers that come up for us when we experience change to thrive through that. And so that's what I'm really passionate about. And I'm super excited to be here with this great panel to share some of my insights and learnings.
Hey, thanks, Chris, and welcome, Jess. Nice to see you virtually once again.
Nice to see you again, Rod, too. It's lovely to be on another panel with you and excited to meet the rest of all of you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Goldberg. I teach leaders how to communicate with influence. So I'm an executive coach, I'm a corporate trainer, and I also teach leadership and communication skills at Columbia University. And I deeply believe that within organizations, Chris mentioned change is constant. We always have changes that are happening, whether it's things that we as leaders want to have happen, we want to grow and scale the organization, or whether it's things that are unexpected. The economy shifts, things change, and we need to learn how to help the people that we have around us be able to navigate that really well, be able to navigate it with grace, be able to move forward and make great choices. And so today, I think, is an amazing panel to be able to talk about this, because in order to have the success we want, in order to collaborate well, we have to be able to manage change well.
Thanks, Jess, and welcome, Renuka.
Thank you, Rod. And it is amazing to watch your commitment to this work. You're up at 1:30 in the morning, so thank you for doing this, and thank you for having us on the panel. It's really lovely to meet everybody. My name is Renuka Iyer, and I work for Pharma. I'm their I'm people officer and also their executive vice president. Just like Sanjeev, I have experience working in India and now here in the US. I'm joining you today from Washington, DC. And to me, what interests me about change is the question about a transformation at scale. I was told the story a couple of months ago. There was a room full of people, and this person who was talking to the room full of people asked, "How many of you think that we need to change something about whatever they were discussing?" And every single person's hand went up. The next question was, "How many of you want to lead this change?" And not one person put their hand up. So how do we then get transformation and change in a world where change is necessary, but no one wants to be accountable for it? And that that question is what interests me in this work. And thank you for having me.
Thanks, Renuka. All right, so our opening question. So I just thought we'd begin with a broad strategic focus question to set the stage. So just wondering, how do you strike the right balance between having a clear strategic vision for change and remaining agile to adapt as situations evolve? So we've got the strategic element and we've got some tactical maybe. So who wants to have a go at that one?
I'll start. I guess, Rod, the big thing that in terms of change, our personal lives are changing every single day, every single moment of every single day. If you take that philosophy of things changing in our personal lives and at home, and then bring everybody together into one melting pot of a company, an organization where everybody's got all this change, it can be an interesting concoction what comes out of it, because everybody's got to navigate their own change plus the company change. It could definitely depend on how it's developed. The one thing too that I kind of have an experience with in the education world is the idea of learning abilities. Dealing with all kinds of learners, and in this industry and any industry, you've got people that are going to be audio, people that are going to be visual, kinesthetic. So you have to be able to present things that are going to be able to cater to every single one of those people. It's how you present, it's how you relate, it's how you get the information forward, because it really truly makes adaptation at the company level that much easier if you can bring everybody along and have them see them be a part of the change.
Thanks, Mark.
Rod, if I may,
Yes.
I may just add to what Mark has said just now. From my experience, what I have seen is when organizations are driving change, there's some once that presentation is completed, I think the leadership team thinks that the change is done, but the change is not yet done. So I think
the organization still has to really understand the why of the change. How do they fit into the change, and then how it is going to really impact them at an individual level. To like Mark's point, the moment something new gets announced, everybody is going to think about like how is it going to impact me, and that's an important aspect that people have to really consider. But 9 out of 10 times, your top management team has already moved on to the next change or next initiative and not seen through like what is happening. So to me, like what I have seen really work is, if I may, like a 4-step formula. Like one is just establishing like a very clear vision, but at the same time also creating a flexible roadmap, which means that your vision is your compass, but your roadmap is adaptable and changeable. Review regularly, and then also like listen for feedback, and then learn from setbacks, because it's not going to run the way the presentation was. When you actually go in real world, things are going to be very different. So the map is not the territory, as they say, right? When you go out, things are going to change. So your change initiative needs to have all of that built in terms of change, engaging the right stakeholders. And then lastly, I think very important is to use data. Those 4 to me are very important things that need to be considered. And when you're driving change and you want flexibility.
Yeah. I'll jump in here quick, Rod. I think what Mark and Sanjeev said are totally spot on. One of the things that I've experienced in kind of helping leadership teams think about the strategy as part of a change or transformation program is really trying to create what we call feedback loops, right? These two-way dialogues, right? And staying disciplined and including that in the strategy for the duration, which is very hard to do, right? But if you can instill that and execute on those two-way dialogues, then the feedback you get from that, kind of the data, to Sanjeev's part, you can use that to adapt the change plan as you're going, right? As we hear what people are saying, kind of, so we assess maybe how they're understanding or what they're trusting, right? Use that feedback to then adjust the tactics that we use throughout the change program. But it's really hard to stay disciplined on that feedback loop piece, because I think that's pretty scary for a lot of leaders, honestly, is to open up and to listen to what people have to say and then transparently show it back. And that's more than a twice-a-year engagement survey, right? That is a very disciplined routine where we are collecting feedback, through regular occurring meetings to focus groups and some pulse survey activities to then make sense of that and tweak our change plans going forward. So I think one strategy to incorporate is feedback loops, and then tactically make sure you stick to that and apply that back, what you learn from there, to keep the plan agile.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Chris. Sorry, Rod, if you want to go. There's one more thing I'd really like to add in on this point. So, Mark and Sanjay and Chris all made amazing points about what you need when you as a leader have decided what change needs to be made. But so often we approach change management and buy-in as selling. We've come up with the idea of change that we need and we want to have happen, and now we're going to sell it to everyone else. But real buy-in really starts with co-creation. So before we even start to announce the strategy of what we want to get and what we want to change and what we need to change, it's really great to start with what I like to call a listening tour, really trying to, which this kind of plays into what Chris was mentioning around the feedback loops, but this is before we even announce that strategy, where we're kind of making sure that we understand what is going on for our employees. What role do they want to play in this change? What would they like to envision and see? Doesn't mean that we take every single thing that they say into account, but by making them feel heard and by making them part of that co-creation, it's going to make them far more likely to buy into the change that we're actually making. Because at least, even if we haven't agreed with them, we've heard them out, we've allowed them to be part of it. And then when we're driving forward with a new direction, they're going to feel much more bought in on it, especially when we can use language of what we heard from them matters to them and actually incorporate that into our strategy.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, such good points. Maybe I'll just add in, and I don't know if that's what you want me to do, Rod.
All
right. I don't know why my camera keeps turning off, but hopefully you can see me now. I think very, very well said and good points. I'd start with the mindset itself. Sometimes people get attached to the change that they're leading instead of simply being involved with the change that they're leading, and then then it becomes personal. especially when we talked about the feedback loop and when staff, when people are asking questions about the change, if it is seen as a personal attack, then it doesn't serve the purpose per se. So being involved in the change process and being disciplined about the process versus the outcome of change, I think is one piece I talk about. The other one is the ability to reframe the future. The reason you want to change, or the reason, it could be several reasons. The reason for change could be external. It could be internal. So having the ability to pay attention to that, to reframe the future, I think is important. And then the last point I'll make is balancing the positive motivators and the negative motivators. So, you want to make sure that people know that by this change, we're going to go from an emotional state at some point in time to a state in which we're experimenting and finding new ways of doing things. So having this balance between what's a positive message we're taking to staff and what are some pain points that this change could address. So those would be the few additions I have. Thank you. And let me figure out what's going on with my camera.
Thank you, Renuka. No, I love all the points you made there. And I mean, my background's the Air Force, and where discipline and briefing and debriefing is a daily occurrence. And that's really what keeps everyone engaged and co-creating on what's being planned for the day. So sort of moving on from that, so change often faces resistance. So from your experience, what are some of the effective ways to get the buy-in of the stakeholders, of the employees, to just overcome resistance? Who'd like to have a go at that one? How do we deal with resistance?
I'll start with this. Humans love change. I don't know what you're talking about. It's definitely something that doesn't affect anybody negatively. But I think going off of one of the points, especially that Jess pointed out in the last question, is that having the team be a part of the creation is really kind of one of those keys to making that buy-in happen at every level. When we try to adapt an organizational change, one of the things we'll do is have some of those key leaders within the company, even though they don't have a title, but you can have leaders that are at any title, have them be a part of a discussion. And you could almost lead the witness into, this is what we want to talk about. What are your ideas? You may know what they're going to be, but if they have an opportunity to voice those opinions and actually see them come to fruition as part of the solution, at the end of the day, they're going to share with their colleagues. Their colleagues are going to share out. And if you got to be planful about it too. If you give too much information, it's going to want to happen immediately. People are going to get nervous. They're going to get excited. They're going to get, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? You have to be strategic about it. And there's going to be times where, maybe somebody is giving you some opposition. Maybe they're not fully committed. Maybe that's the time you're going to see, that bottom 1% that's not necessarily into it. You can't cater to them. You have to cater to everybody else. And maybe you do need to free them up for other employment opportunities, as one of my past employers used to say. But again, you can't let them drag down the majority and, kind of prohibit that change from happening, especially when it's for a great purpose.
I can jump in just so I speak up when my camera's still working.
Thank you.
So I have three points to offer. One is thinking upstream, thinking about what needs to happen now if this change is expected to come in the next how many ever days or weeks. Two is having a plan B. What happens when, and having that plan B. And three is finding the next action that everyone can take collectively so that you begin to speak into the future that we're creating. And having those three specific pieces as part of the strategy for change could be helpful.
Thanks, Renuka.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think, Mark and Renuka, great points. And, one of the things that I've been trying to work with leaders and organizations on is kind of this concept of like, how do you democratize the change, right? And so I'll give you a brief analogy. I'm not a parent myself, but I've read that if you have a 4-year-old and that 4-year-old's being resistant to going to bed, right? What an expert suggests you do is you ask that 4-year-old, before you get in bed tonight at 8 o'clock, do you want me to read you a story or do you want me to tell you a story? And what you've done is you've shifted that 4-year-old's mindset to think that they have a buy-in in going to bed at 8 o'clock. When going to bed at 8 o'clock has really never been up for debate. But how I get into bed at 8 o'clock has now I've shifted my mindset to feel that I'm a part of that decision. And so I think we want to try to apply that at scale for our change and transformation programs, right? And so how do you allow the population to weigh in or vote on certain decisions along the journey, right? How do you want to receive communications? How often do you want to receive communications? Do you want to be a tester? Do you want to be trained? How do you want to be trained? Do you want to be involved in design processes, right? And I think there's some things that, if there's some things that just aren't going to be able to make sense to just tailor it to a small group. But I think where we can tailor the experience to certain people, we should do that to allow them this feeling of kind of co-collaboration and buy-in to limit that resistance, right? Kind of back to that analogy of the 4-year-old getting into bed. And so if we can think about, some of our change programs at scale that way, I think we can start to lower that resistance and create more buy-in.
I love that.
Rod, can you just? Yeah, I think those are really that was a great example. Jess, do you want to go?
No, you can go next. I'll go after you.
Yeah, I think some great points. I just wanted to add 2 points in addition to what Mark and Chris and Renuka have said. One is when you're going through the change process, when you hear concerns and when you hear issues, I think quickly responding to those concerns, I think is super critical to build trust and credibility of the team that is really driving it. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that you need to really find a solution for everything, but even going back to say, that's a great point, but we don't have any answers right now. Let's, whatever is the roadmap, to say, let's find the answers together, or we will be able to give you the answers at some point in time. It's super important, because if you don't do that, then misinformation and the fears and the anxieties and the urban legends, all of those things really happen that really undermines the change initiative. So to me, that's an important step. And of course, communicating as transparently as possible is the second point that I really wanted to make. Making sure that you are as transparent as possible, just so that you're not overloading people with communication, but also you're not providing them the information at the right time. Thank you. Jess, over to you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm actually going to jump a little bit off of that. This was something that I was wanting to talk about, is when I go into organizations, one of the biggest things is, so often leaders lead these AMAs. They're like, ask me any questions. And at that point, they get frustrated because, the employees are not bought in. And so I mentioned before that the big thing is, before you even announce the strategy, you're trying to get buy-in, trying to understand what people want. But after, when you're facing resistance, once you've started to announce the strategy, the very key thing is to really make sure you understand why they are resistant on it. So rather than they ask a question, they're trying to, push back on something and you're defending it, rather than being in a place of defensiveness, initially start off by trying to explore what the root is. And it can be really hard to understand what the root of the problem is, or the root of their resistance is, because sometimes it's several layers beneath it. They might initially sound like they're saying that we don't have enough resources, but really underneath that, there's a fear that, maybe they're going to be laid off. So if we can kind of get a layer deeper and understand, explore, okay, where did I lose you? Which part of this strategy is actually the part that, feels frustrating to you? Maybe if they're saying that they don't have resources, maybe there's some truth in it. And so it's worth looking at when someone is resistant to our change. Why are they resistant? And especially if they keep pushing and keep rambling, there's some truth to it. And it's worth us as leaders taking a hard look at what part of what they're saying is actually true. And do I need to shift and change this a little bit? And just sometimes subtle shifts and subtle changes that we can make to make people feel like, okay, we're making it better for them. We're giving them a little bit more resources so that now they can actually feel empowered to move forward on what we're building with them. They're going to be far more likely to buy in. So really, it's about trying to understand where that resistance is coming from. And then if we can, trying to adjust. Doesn't mean we have to change all of our plans, but we need to be a little bit flexible as leaders to be able to be open to, we don't actually have all the solutions. So often as leaders, we are not on the ground floor. We don't understand what's actually happening. So sometimes we assume we know because we think about what it used to be like when we were on the ground floor or what we think we know, but we don't actually understand. So sometimes we actually need to get some of that. You know, Chris had mentioned feedback loops. That's really an important thing.
Thanks, Jess. Any more on this one? I think we actually jumped into what my next question was going to be, which was all about the role of communication. I think we've spoken a lot about the role of communication. I'm just wondering then, just to go a bit deeper on communication, is there any sort of frameworks, approaches that anyone actually uses in communication for a change?
I'll jump in. I think one of the things that I try to advise, leadership teams and leaders to communicate is to use the power of narratives, right? I mean, as individuals, we really learn from stories. And I think that if we can, apply stories and even more importantly, analogies to kind of our change and why we're changing, this can help people understand, right? Analogies are proven to help your brain make connections from new and complex information to connecting it to existing things that are within your mind. So the more you can apply, simple analogies as part of your communication strategy to help people, understand complex information or new information, I think you start to create that level of understanding that you need. Now, that's not easy, but I think if we can try to do that more, that's just the natural way we've been learning throughout the evolution of our species.
That's brilliant, Chris.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. I'm actually going to double down on that. So I've developed a framework I call the 7-part framework for how to get buy-in. And I'm not going to go into all of it right now. I can actually share it in the chat if people want to look into it later. But one of the key things is about narrative. It's about how do we, once we're at that point of, we're going to sell this to our employees, we're going to share it, we want to get buy-in. It's really about how do we tell the story of why this change is happening, why it matters, who it's going to impact. So we need central characters that we're going to, talk about. We don't need to do every element of telling a huge, long story, but who are the central characters of why this change matters? Who's it going to impact? Let's make them a character. And then make your employees the heroes of the story. Make them the protagonists. Help them see themselves as how they are going to be the heroes in helping this change happen. And make that, the challenge that you're going through to make this change happen. That's the challenge. That's the, the thing we have to overcome together. Rally everyone as a team that are the heroes that are trying to overcome this challenge to help the, the central characters in the story and provide a clear vision of what success looks like. That's your happily ever after. So you want to create a little bit of a story when you are announcing your strategy so people can see what role they play and feel bought in that.
I think I might triple down on Chris and Jess's comment there. It's also so crucial. I guess the thing to consider too is, going back to people having different learning styles. Some people learn better with a one-on-one conversation, so that's how they like to communicate. Some people are fine, just write it down in an email, send it to me, I'll be fine, we'll be good. But you have to kind of go to the approach that you're comfortable with and they can be comfortable with and try to find a commonality between that. I liken back to, when we change a policy within the company, that needs to be communicated to everybody. So usually we do it in a large Zoom or group, or sometimes it's in person. And there's times where I'll be going through and just reading the script, everything was done, and all of a sudden somebody in the room does some kind of facial expression, something that throws me off. And I can't tell you how many times I go back and, well, they must not have liked that. Let me re-explain it. Let me go back here. Come to find out later on, maybe they just had something funny to eat at lunch and it just came back up. But you don't know what anybody's going through. And you have to, I guess at the end of the day, find that communication style that works for you, works for everybody, and stay the course no matter what. You can always open up for questions later, have conversations later. But again, meet everybody where they're at, because the only thing that's communicated is what hits their ears from your mouth. It's not a matter of what you're saying. Everybody has their own interpretation of it. And if they interpret it differently than you're intending, then you need to figure out the whys to that.
That's really good, Mark.
I can add one more to this list to make sure that communication is structured. And when I say structured, be respectful, don't afraid to be bold, but also be instructive. Oftentimes when change happens, something about the environment is ambiguous. So you want to create as much stability, and I'd offer that the stability can be created in the process of communication itself. So you may have heard of the tell rule. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Also using the structure around, is this information that you're sharing? Is this an opportunity for collaboration? Maybe there's feedback and you want to collect the feedback by a certain day. Tell them how long it will take for them to give the feedback. So as much as possible. And then if it's an instruction, just tell them, this is what we want to do. I think sometimes we're afraid to announce the change simply because we're afraid of the backlash, and that doesn't help. If a decision is already made, it's best to communicate it and then explain what were the considerations made to arrive at this decision. Were these considerations external to the organization or internal? Are we driving for certain results because of which these changes? Once the decision is made, it's always best to bring your people in and tell them that the decision is made. Oftentimes, when the decision is made and then we go in and ask for feedback, that's not helping at all because it's not building trust. So making sure that all communication is structured, respectful, socially aware, and making sure that it's building trust versus depleting it.
Thanks, Renu.
One point I think what Renu said was fantastic. So were all the other points like Jess, Mark, and Chris. But just one point is, when we are communicating, I think there's an overload of communication in organizations today, and there are so many channels from where communication comes in. There's like a social media channel, there's an email, there's an intranet, but I think not forgetting there is a human element to there. Because one of my experiences when I was leading a communication team, we did actually this research to say, how does messages stick? And overwhelmingly, at least my team got the feedback that they would still want to actually hear it, either from their manager or from whoever is the leader. But I think they needed that human touch. And I think that's an important consideration when you're really driving significant change that is going to impact the organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I just want to pick up, I think Mark made a point that I would like to explore a bit further, which was with the rise of the remote and hybrid work models, what are our unique challenges and opportunities we have in managing change, dealing with both the remote hybrid model? Who wants to add on to that one?
I can get us started. Certainly, there is this fear about those that are working in hybrid or in remote situations about what am I missing, right? And sometimes there's this concept of out of sight, out of mind for people. In HR, I've heard a lot of staff tell us, "Hey, how are you making sure that your analyses of the talent function is done well, so that you make sure that no one is left behind for a promotion or for a training or any of those kinds of advancements?" Oftentimes, conversations happen in the hallway, and you miss that. So making sure that the organization is aware of these things as you think about the hybrid environment or even fully remote environment. They are difficult. It's one thing to simply be in person and simply walk. As you're walking the hallways, you meet someone and you sometimes people end up making an important decision that's going to impact a lot of other people in that hallway. So making sure that if something like that happens, then those that are working remote are also brought in. And the other point is, a lot of organizations today are not restricted to just one place. So this is a situation that is true even for organizations that are working in person, right? Whether you're hybrid or whether you're virtual, you may be in person and have another office in another location. So making sure that those employees are not left behind. So really taking this approach of how do I make sure that the message that I'm communicating is crisp and clear and that everyone receives it at the same time. Whether that is in, making sure, again, I'm going back to the structured communication, but making sure that that gets to every single person, whether or not you're in a remote environment. Thanks.
Thanks, Renuga. Anyone want to build on that at all?
Yeah, I can just add some perspective, Rod. And I think this is a paradox right now. A lot of organizations are dealing with this challenge. I've been part of conversations where when you really want people to come into office, wherever they are, I think there's a huge resistance from team members to come into office because the question that they're asking is, what for? Because if I'm able to deliver what you're asking me to deliver from wherever I am, why do I need to come into office? So like just breaking that myth that communication or things will be better coming into office. And on the other side, I think the issue that I hear is we are losing those moments where we were connecting with each other, like those water cooler moments. So for me, I think organizations, at least in the teams that I have worked in, we've tried some experimentation. Like one of the experiments that we did in Europe was like once in a quarter, and this is only possible in that geographical area. We had we identified 3 offices. Like in Europe, one was in Edinburgh, one was in London, and one was in I think this was in Brussels. And we asked all the team members, which was a smaller team, to really come in like one day where they would the whole agenda was to really connect with each other and then share messages. So I think that was one that it worked pretty well because people got an opportunity to work with each other. But this is definitely like a huge challenge for organizations, and the more structure, the more intentional you are. I think that's what I have learned, that you've got to be intentional when you are drafting your communication. Going back to the point that Renuka was making, the structure, making sure that you're inclusive is super critical. Thanks.
I'm gonna build on Sanjeev's point around inclusion. As I think about change, right, whether it's in the hybrid environment, virtual environment, or in person, one of the things that I think we often do is we err on the side of speed during our change programs. And what I think we really need to do is step back and think, how do we create longer tables instead of taller fences, right? And so I think that's even a step beyond inclusivity, right? That's really how do you kind of open up the doors to do what Jess talked about, right? Co-collaborate, allow people to feel like they're involved in the process of the change. And in this new frontier of kind of this new paradigm of how we're working, whether it's totally virtual or hybrid or in person, this still applies, and it's just more complex. So I love Sanjeev's point about this intentionality of it. And so I really think, like, how do you become intentional about really creating longer tables as opposed to taller fences during your change programs to allow as many of us to feel a part of the change as possible? That's where you're going to get that buy-in and momentum.
Love your examples there. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, and I'd love to just build a little bit on that. So, Sanjay and Chris made some incredible points around the theories of how do we actually, what's the important elements that we need to have in this change. And, I'm going to move a little bit to the tactical side of things, especially when we're living in a digital world. So when we're talking about being in a digital world and we're trying to make change happen, when people are spread across, different countries and different backgrounds, and we're trying to bring everyone together for a change that's happening, there's a couple things that you want to be thinking about. One is the more closeness that we have people together in physical proximity. So if you are able to bring people together for an in-person offsite after a big change has happened, so maybe the company has gone through a restructuring or a reorg, bringing people together in person is a great way for people to start to build that connection and also build that trust with you as a leader about the changes that are happening. Because when we are in person, it's easy to dehumanize the people that we are working with, the leaders that we are with, when we're not able to have that human level of touch. So the goal is, if you have the possibility, if you have the budget, bring people in person. If you do not, the worst way to announce a new strategy or change is to just send everyone a Slack message. I've seen leaders do it and it does not work. And so the next best thing is, how can you carve out time, a long, not just ask me anything, but really structured conversations. Maybe it's, broken out with individual teams and you're meeting with each team separately. How can you break out time to build more of that human connection so that they can understand you, be able to humanize you as a leader, be able to understand your perspective, you can hear theirs. So how do you actually tactically create these moments where you create more connection? And that is, either more Zoom breakout rooms where you're talking with the employees directly. And then, you have to do repeated ways of being able to explain to them the strategy. So after you finish the Zoom call that you've done with them, where you've really kind of explained things out, following up with an email laying everything out so that people don't just have to rely on memory to be able to remember what you said. If you can instate what you had said to them, what new decisions were made, sending it in a follow-up email so everyone has the same thing, because sometimes employees will interpret things differently when they leave the meeting. So following up with written communication is really key. So one, we pair it human side first, build that connection in the way that we introduce the strategy, understand the resistance, and then we pair it with written communication that solidifies what's happening.
Thanks, Jess. All right, we'll move on. So, learning from failure. So, not all changes succeed. I'm just wondering if anyone wants to share a time when a change effort didn't achieve its desired outcomes, and what were some of the key learnings from that experience or multiple experiences. Anyone seen that?
I think given in a lot of our changes, whether it's a new handbook, new policy, new something we're rolling out, there's always going to be elements that work and elements that maybe don't work. One of the things that my boss is phenomenal at this, but one of his things is if you're going to fail fast. So we learn from it, we move on, fix what needs fixed, and then get to that next place. There's been many times being in education, I was writing a handbook for 20 years. And then when I got here, all of a sudden they didn't have a handbook, but this is what it looks like. I've rewritten that again, probably 4 or 5 times to make it fit, what our culture is going to be. We try to take care of the team before anything else. That's pretty much the standard pillar that we base everything that we do on. That's a true part of that vision, but are there mistakes that happen? Are there things that are, not working? Absolutely. The fact of being the ability to be adaptable, be flexible, and communicate with your leadership team, with your team, to be able to say, kind of to Jess's point, leaders are still human too. We do make mistakes. That is not going to change. And I think the more connectivity we have with our team, the more they can see that, yeah, you are flesh and bone. You do have a family to go home to at night. You don't live in your closet. I used to think my elementary teachers lived in their closet, and then when they would come back to school, they would just come out of their closet and teach me. I didn't think that they had personal lives back in the day. Leaders are kind of that same way, and sometimes they're viewed that way, and we have to keep that in mind too, making sure the way we're viewed and the way we're perceived within those connections is something that's going to help us grow personally and professionally.
Thanks, Matt. Anyone else want to volunteer something?
Yeah, absolutely. So as leaders, we often think that a failure is a failure on us, in that if we've done, if something didn't work, that we ourselves are failures as leaders. But it's, failure is just something that will always happen in many ways. And one of the most powerful things you can actually say as a leader is, I was wrong on that. And being able to own up when something didn't work is going to get you far more buy-in on the next strategy that you do. Because sometimes if we don't own up to it, we think that that's a sign of weakness. If we acknowledge that what we did was wrong, that it didn't work, if we acknowledge that, we worry that that's going to show our weakness, that people aren't going to trust us anymore. But it's actually the opposite. When we're able to be vulnerable as leaders, honor that we were wrong on that decision that we made, that change didn't work. And that now, we have some more awareness, and this is why we're going to change that direction. People will feel more bought in if they feel like you are actually being honest with them, if you're being vulnerable with them, if you're able to honor your own mistakes. they're going to understand the humanity of that. And so it's really important. I've seen leaders just try and brush off and just be like, well, we're making this new strategy because our investors said it, rather than honoring really where the mistakes were. And so I really encourage leaders to, it's okay if failures happen. It's okay if a direction that you want to go in doesn't work. We always have to reevaluate. That's why the feedback loops are there that Chris was mentioning about. It is to help us know when things aren't working. And that is actually a win when we've discovered that something isn't working.
Yeah, I'm gonna build off Jess's point, right? Because I think the interesting thing about change or transformation in an organization is it's in the direction of progress. And progress can't be made without failure, right? But as humans, we all have this natural aversion to failure, right? And that comes a lot from our evolution, right? And neuroscience kind of shows us that, right? You don't want to fail because it used to mean life or death if we failed, right? And then growing up, right, there's been a stigmatism with failure. And so we avoid failure at all costs. But to truly change, right, in the direction of progress, failure has to happen. So I love Jess's points about kind of admitting that you made a mistake, or sharing that you were wrong, being transparent, the vulnerability aspect. It's so important during times of change. And I think the more you as a leader can role model reframing failure in the direction of exploration and discovery, right, you can help others then feel safe that, all right, if I make mistakes along this change journey, it's okay. And I think that's a big part of change, right? It's, to learn, we actually learn more from our failures than our successes. So failure is great data when it comes to change and transformation. So it's not something we should fear, but it's something we should kind of seek out, apply, and learn from to keep making progress.
Yeah, it's really good, Chris.
I have a slightly different angle to this, and I'm not going to talk about a specific example per se, but this notion that a lot of leaders talk about failing fast, or let's admit a mistake. The truth of the matter is, as humans, it's really hard for us to do that, to admit mistakes and to say I was wrong. Nobody wants to make mistakes, and I don't think anybody should make mistakes. Now, I know that I'll get a lot of flack for it. However, I think it's perfectly okay, or in fact, I'd encourage all of us to have a curious mindset. You assume you're making a mistake when you're attached to the end result. I wanted this result, I couldn't get it, and therefore I made a mistake. But when you attach, or when you're intentional about the process, about following the process, then you have the opportunity to reframe the future, or to reframe what that result might look like. So I'd offer that instead of really looking at, did we make a mistake or not, looking at, is this working for us or not? If it's not working, then we can try something else. So that experimental and curious and experimental mindset is something that we can cultivate even in the conversations we're having. So that, no one really has to go down this path of admitting that they've made a mistake. It's not working anymore. We wanted this to happen by X date. It's not working. We don't see that, or the projection is that we're not going to get there. What can we do now that will allow us to get to a different spot, right? So having that, having experimentation be part of the communication has helped. Thanks.
So, can I offer like one example, just building off what I'm hearing from my panelists? And I'll give an example. We were actually doing implementation of a very critical software, and we were working towards a specific timeline. And like we were really driving hard, and I thought that I had the most perfect plan along with my leadership team, and we did not meet the deadline. Not only we missed the deadline, but literally we had to shift it by almost 6 months, which was like so unacceptable, is what we thought. But when we did the after action review, what we learned was, eye-opening. A lot of people who were actually the technical experts knew this was not possible, but they never shared it very openly. And that really led to this whole issue. And then, of course, we implemented after 6 months. But the important point that I want to make was, as a lesson learned from this, I worked with my leadership team, and we had like this reward and recognition program. And we slowly started to really build confidence in our team to say it's okay when you see problems. And we actually constituted an award to say, I tried and I failed. And I will tell you, of course, you have to do a self-nomination for that. The initial couple of months, 0 nominations, but it's like one brave person started the nomination. We celebrated somebody who failed. And slowly and steadily, the mindset and the culture changed. Managers were much more open to teams trying things out. And I think like what Chris and some others have spoken, I was more open to really sharing with my team what are the things that I'm trying, even on the personal front. Like, I was trying to learn guitar and I just couldn't do it. Actually, I just couldn't read the notes, stuff like that. Like, not really just talking about professionally, but it just opened up or gave people this permission to say, oh, it's okay to fail. And that was something which really changed the game for me and the team. So I thought it was apt for me to share it at this forum right now. Thanks.
No, they were really good additions there. I think someone made a comment in the chat, if failure equals punishment, people avoid taking risks. I think they also avoid communicating that that something happened that shouldn't have happened. And that's certainly my background against the Air Force, and that's very much with airplanes that sometimes things happen that shouldn't and they don't get reported is a bit of a thing. All right, so golly gosh, we've only got 10 minutes left. Being a HR panel for Hacking HR, I'm just curious on what sort of roles can a HR professional have to help empower the teams, empower leaders to help implement change. So thinking it from how can we help HR professionals?
I think the one thing we have to understand as HR professionals, we are that primary agent of change for the team, for the leadership. We are the fact that we are in human relations. That is our currency. That's what we deal in. We're not a matter of not necessarily the bottom line, even though everything we do does affect the bottom line at the end of the day. I still want to put food on the table for my family at home, but we also need to understand again that if we don't do it, nobody else is going to. So we have to find a way to figure out what is going to work for us, what is going to work for them. Really kind of understanding that no matter what, the vision, the strategy of the company, the goal is to grow, it's to develop. And if you can't figure out a way to make that happen for everybody personally, professionally, then it's not going to happen as a company. And you want to be able to instill that idea of growth within everybody. But again, you're that person. At the end of the day, nobody else is going to do it. And that's why we have such a strong EQ. That's why we have, everything that comes with the empathy and everything relating to people. It's why we do what we do. It's why we get up in the morning. Aside from the fact that my dog is nuzzling me to let her out every day, that's why I have to get up when I do in the morning. But again, there's purpose. There's that plan, and if we don't do it, who will?
Thanks, Mark.
I can jump in. So I think as HR people, we can transform ourselves to be coaches. And when I say coaches, I'm thinking about what are the different elements we bring in. Paying attention to OD and change and OD, they go hand in hand. And someone recently told me to replace the word culture as I speak with leaders with the word group dynamics, because when you say culture, sometimes you could put arm's length distance with the organizational culture and simply say, well, the culture is so. But when you say group dynamics, then you're part of the group. And if the dynamics is a certain way, then you have the ability to change something about that group. And so it becomes a little bit more personal. So making sure that you're familiar with the concepts in organization development and OD, the concepts in KM. I've certainly benefited by learning about design thinking and systems thinking. So just familiarizing yourself and gaining that knowledge is helpful. And like I said, having that coaching mindset, making sure that your leaders find their own answers and not necessarily go in with a prescriptive, here's what you got to do. There are times when you have to be instructive and and say, here's what you got to do, but making sure that they are bought into that and really go through the coaching with them as they navigate change. And then doing that for yourself, coaching oneself as HR is going through change, because I know that HR, I mean, my work, we go through a lot of change ourselves. So making sure that we build in the time for change and don't rush it. Thanks.
Runika, I love that, replacing the word culture with group dynamics. I think that's brilliant. So thanks for sharing that. I think as HR, I just say two things quickly. One is I think you need to kind of shift your mindset and stop thinking about change as episodic, right? It's everywhere, it's constant, it's dynamic. And so I think as a way to sustainably navigate that, start to think about change as a capability, right? It's a capability you as yourself need to develop. And then you need to think about the programs that can develop it in the leaders you're supporting as HR, and then as well as the employee populations that you're supporting as HR. So your talent development, talent management, learning development strategies need to take this aspect of teaching people how to navigate change as part of a strategic initiative, as part of HR.
That's really beautiful, Chris. I love that, the shifting of the mindset. And I would love to offer another shift of the mindset. So I think, so often we've thought about change as a monologue. I talked about how at the beginning we think it's about selling our idea of change to someone else about what we want, but we really need to make it a dialogue. And as much as HR professionals, as we can be the person that facilitates that dialogue, we can be the person to help encourage that dialogue. Encourage the feedback loops that Chris was talking about, encourage the, making sure that the conversations happen before the change is actually announced. So as HR professionals, we can play that role of being the person that facilitates and encourages dialogue throughout the process so that we make it better for everyone.
Thanks, Jess. Any more on this one? All right, we've got 4 minutes left, not long. I just wonder, just very, very quickly, just what's one key takeaway that that people should be doing every day around change? Change is happening every day, so what can help keep people grounded?
I think the one thing at the end of the day with anything you can do is just maintain that connections, maintain the pulse of your team. Any little change that they're going through, anything organizationally, you need to know where they're at and you need to talk to them where they're at. Again, the things that you say mean nothing unless they're heard the right way on the other end. So you need to make sure you have that buy-in, because if you don't have that buy-in, then maybe they're not that right employee. But being able to identify that initially for the sake of the company, for the sake of them personally and professionally, I think that's truly our job, to connect at that human level. Because no matter what level, we are human. That's, like we said, I think that's the biggest thing to realize throughout this, that, no matter what we do, everything we do matters to everybody.
Thanks, Mark.
If I can jump in, I would say assume positive intent. I know it is difficult at times when you're going through a change process. There's a lot of anxiety, but if you can't assume a positive intent, then you should really question why are you there wherever you are. And that's the one thing that might take away.
Yeah, I love that. Assume positive intent. I think too, the big thing for me, and I think Runika started with it, Jess talked about it, we've all mentioned it here and there, but I think change is really a shift in mindset, right? When you change the way you look at things, things start to change. And as we navigate change as individuals and organizations, really starting with kind of how do we start to shift our perspectives and shift the way we think about things traditionally to better embrace the change, I think is really the linchpin to all of it.
I'll share as
Anyone
well.
else?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So one thing that I think is really important that we didn't dive too deep on, but I think is just really important to end on, is that people don't follow you. They don't follow your idea. They follow a vision for a better future. So when we are thinking about change, how can we help build a better future for all of us at the organization? And if we can have that through line that we're trying to build a better future, that is going to make change go so much better. Because if you're thinking about building a better future, you're thinking about what's better for, all of the employees that you currently have, what's better for the customers, the clients, the thing that you're building, and what's better also for you as an individual. But it's collectively, how do we build a better future for everyone? And how do we communicate that that's the, something that we're trying to build together?
All right,
Thanks.
and my last input is going to be, how can you create predictability and ambiguity with clarity, right? So I'd offer these 3 questions: what, so what, and now what? And having an answer to these and clearly communicating it with all the different channels we talked about today could be super helpful.
Thanks, Rika. And thanks everyone. It's been a really enjoyable panel, even if it is 2 a.m. in Melbourne, Australia. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And we really covered the strategy, tactically spoke a lot about communication is really key. So thanks everyone. And I look forward to the next panel. I think I've got one tomorrow. So thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.